I'd like to welcome everybody to this evening's webinar presentation. I'm Doreen Heineman with the Sashbear Foundation, and we are very pleased to present Dr. Blaise Aguirre tonight to speak with you. Before we get started, I have just a couple of housekeeping issues to discuss. I want to let you know that this evening's presentation will be recorded, and so you can watch tonight's recording afterwards if you happen to miss anything or you want to review it again. Typically, it will be posted on our YouTube channel and on our website at the resources page. And that way, in about 10 days, you'll probably be able to rewatch this or share it with somebody else if you want to have them watch it as well. I want to let you know that Blaise will be able to take a few questions at the end of his presentation. We will not be able to get to all of the questions, but we'll do our best to get through them, and we'll certainly highlight those that are of the broadest general interest or those questions which are most closely related to what he is speaking about tonight. Also, just to let you know, this is being presented in webinar format, and so that means that we can't hear you and we can't see you. However, you can put the questions that you have into the chat box or into the Q&A box, and at the end we will moderate those questions and ask Blaise to answer a few of them for us. Let's see, do I have anything else I need to say? No, I don't think so. I just want to let you know that we are the Sashbear Foundation presenting this to you, and we are a registered Canadian charity that provides education, skills, and hope for family members of those who have emotion dysregulation. And so as a registered charity, we always welcome donations and support for the work that we do. We try to provide everything free of charge as much as possible, but of course we welcome your support. And we're just finalizing a big fundraising campaign, so if you want to go to our website at sashbear.org, then you can help us out with that. No pressure. So with that, I would like to introduce Lynn. Lynn Coury is the founder of the Sashbear Foundation. She's going to introduce our special guest tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Doreen. Hello, everyone. Dr. Blaise Aguirre is here today with us and is internationally recognized for his extensive work in the treatment of mood and personality disorders in adolescents. And he is the medical director of the 3E's Continuum at Boston McLean Hospital. Dr. Aguirre has written several books and lectures regularly in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East on borderline personality disorder and DBT. His latest book, DBT for Dummies, was launched this month and topped the Amazon bestseller list. I have known Blaise since my daughter Sasha was at McLean 3E's in 2011. Since then, Blaise has collaborated with Sashbear in many projects, such as working on our first school presentation back in 2012, a project that reached over 10,000 students. Blaise also collaborated with us to create the incredible video series, Having a Life Worth Living, available on Sashbear's YouTube channel. Throughout the years, he has been a great supporter of the Sashbear Walk, where we raise awareness, fight stigma on BPD, show that we're not alone, and show the support to those we love who are struggling. It is such an honor today and a privilege to have Dr. Blaise Aguirre present today. I know what to do, I just can't do it. Something that so many of us struggle with. Dr. Blaise Aguirre will be targeting the challenges of using the skills. Please welcome with me my friend and Sashbear's friend, Dr. Blaise Aguirre.
Awesome. Lynn, thank you so much. Mike, thank you. It's we've known each other for 10 years, more than 10 years. You know, it's Sasha was somebody who I was very close to, very connected to. We couldn't help her, but Lynn and Mike and Sashbear have put together, this incredible organization to make sure that what they went through doesn't happen again. And Sasha inspires me more than, that I can say, because when I see kids who are struggling in the ways that Sasha did and the ways that we didn't know that Sasha did, I see the incredible love that Mike and Lynn have for the community of families who are struggling, who don't know what to do. We can't but help. And they are the promise that Sasha hoped for. She was a champion. She remains a champion. She guides many of us, certainly me, clinically, Lynn and Mike and Sashbear, listen, there's not a worthier cause. So, I mean, when you're thinking about your charitable giving for the year, this is free promo here. Please consider them. What they do. They're not flying around in private jets or anything like that. They're doing God's work, Sasha's work. The work that parents need. So, thank you for that. All right. So, what I want to talk a little bit about is the finding that we have where, and especially certainly with the kids that we get, but also the parents that we get, that they don't initially have the skills to be able to deal with difficult situations. But what happens then is that they learn the skills, but something gets in the way of using the skills. And Lynn and I were talking about this, and it's actually a pretty common occurrence. I mean, not many people, of course, do use skills, but it's not always that easy. So I wanted just to talk a little bit about this phenomenon and what we can do about it. So as we think about the problem, how we define it, it's that people know skills. They can even teach the skills. They can demonstrate how the skills are used in theory, but when it comes to practice, they cannot use them. So I want you to think a little bit, about something that you do. Maybe you've got a skill. Maybe you're good at knitting, or maybe you're good at cooking, or maybe you're good at a sport or a language. That you know how to use these things. You know them, but you don't use them. My I have 3 boys. My oldest speaks Spanish, loves Spanish, and when we go to Spain, he uses Spanish. My youngest also speaks Spanish, but when we go to Spain, he never speaks Spanish. So something happens to the old one that that the young one can't do. So one thing is knowing something, but the other thing is using it. So let's just try to break down the problem. So why would somebody either have the skills or not have the skills, but that they don't use skills? Okay, so when we think about the problem, we think about it as, first of all, the learning of the skills and then the using of the skills. Because somebody can learn something, but just because you can repeat it doesn't mean you've actually learned it. Okay, so there's actually some research on skills use, and when we think about the key barriers to actually learning the skills, one of the most common barriers is anxiety for the person in the skills group. Now, this is again for whether it's an adolescent who's in a skill group, or whether it's a parent in a skill group, or just an adult who's in a skill group. So if you think a little bit about this, I mean, it's very hard a certain amount of anxiety is always helpful, but too much anxiety is going to prevent learning. The second thing is a difficulty in understanding the material, and I'll talk a little bit more about this. Now, the other element is this, and that is that when people are overwhelmed by very strong emotions, it leaves us unable or unwilling to use skills, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Okay. Now, when you are feeling very emotional or very anxious, and you've been taught the skills and you've been taught to maybe use the skills, what are the ways to overcoming the barrier of saying, okay, I'm just not going to do that? So now part of attaining any goal is to have a commitment to have that goal. So first of all, if you have a goal, you want to run a 5K, you want to learn how to cook, you want to learn a new language, is you have that as a goal. That motivates you. But now you have to have a commitment to continue to attend therapy, practice skills, and personalize the skills in a way that are useful to you. Okay, so I have this patient who was referred to me, and they said that the patient was struggling with suicidality, and that he was on the autism spectrum, which is not generally something, a case that we will treat using dialectical behavior therapy. When I met the person, he was very motivated to learn skills and very motivated to use skills. So I said, okay, but it sounds like that the groups aren't working and that you're not learning the skills and that you're not using them. What seems to be the problem? So he said, look, I have autism spectrum disorder. And so I don't get involved in these intense romantic relationships. And all we do in groups is to start talking about what happens when you break up with your boyfriend or when you break up with your girlfriend. And so that doesn't apply to me. And so they're not helpful for me. But they seem helpful for the other people. So when you think a little bit about a skill, it's, can you personalize it for your particular circumstance? Can the group help you personalize it for your particular circumstance? Can the group leaders think about it for your particular circumstances? So how can I make this mine? So that's, and how do I stay committed to continue to do this? The other thing is to practice something so often that they become an integral part of a behavioral repertoire. Now, when we talk about DBT skills, we're often talking about these skills in the context of conditions like borderline personality disorder, either because you struggle with borderline personality disorder or because somebody in your life struggles with borderline personality disorder. But think about some of the things that you're good at. Let's say that you're good at playing the piano or the guitar, or at speaking a language, or at playing a sport. How have you gotten good at those things? Because you have practiced the skill of piano playing or guitar playing or speaking the language or doing that sport. And you practiced over and over and over again until they become an integral part of your behavioral repertoire. You can then, if you play the guitar, you pick up the guitar and you can just start playing it because you've done it for most of your life. You don't then say, oh, I have guitar playing skill, but you are skillful in playing the guitar. Now, when we want parents to start practicing, and family members and people with BPD to start practicing these skills, we want them to be repeated over and over and over again. Now, the other thing is this. Sadly, unfortunately, sometimes people say, like, oh, I'm in distress, so I should practice a skill. But here's the thing is, for anything that we do well, we practice when we don't need it so that when we need it is there. You don't practice guitar only when you're in distress, or running only when you're in distress, or cooking only when you're in distress. If you're interested in all of those things, you practice them all the time. You maybe enjoy practicing, cooking and guitar playing. So what I'm saying is that practice these skills when you don't need them over and over. Do role plays so that they become much more integrated and they become much more obvious. And so you don't even have to think about them when the situation arises that you're going to need this skill. And when you're doing this, you're aided by the support of other skills group members and group leaders. If you've got therapists running your groups, by group therapists. If you've got an individual therapist, by individual therapist, and then by friends and family. Now, when we talk about anxiety preventing skills use, or saying you know the skill but you don't want to use them, these are the most common findings. It's judging themselves when they did not understand the material. So I don't understand the material, I look around, everybody else seems to understand what is being said, but I don't. So I judge myself. And maybe you're judging yourself in the way that some of our kids do, which is that, you know, they're stupid, that they're never going to get it, that they're lazy. You know, often the judgment is a very negative judgment that maintains the stereotype and maintains the stigma of like somebody who's incapable of doing it. Or the anxiety is, you know what, this is how I've always done things. You're telling me to do something different, to use a new skill. I'm worried that the treatment will not work, that the skills that you're telling me to use will not work. The other element to this, and I don't know where I do with number 3, but I got rid of number 3, is that that, you know, I'm anxious because my therapist is too authoritarian and too strict, and they just tell me what to do. Or for some people have said, you know what, especially if the skills are being taught in a classroom setting or something like that, that being in that setting where you're writing, where you're learning, where you're taking notes, can sometimes, for people who've had traumatic childhood memories, is that it's too associated with like a classroom, and that they're going to have the urge to just want to leave. You know, so as you think a little bit about the things that get in the way for you, is to think about these elements. So when we then think about what about the content of the skills? Now, when we talk about skills, especially for Sashbear and especially for DBT, we're basically talking about the cognitive behavioral skills associated with dialectical behavior therapy. You know, when I was training in psychoanalytic psychotherapy, you know, they used words like transference and countertransference and introject and projective identification. So these were terms that were used in psychodynamic psychotherapies, and it was very, very much jargon. And then I thought, well, the DBT doesn't have jargon. DBT has just as much jargon as everything else. And one of the reasons we wrote DBT for Dummies is that, you know, I wanted my dad, who's not a dummy, but is not a very psychologically minded person, you know, to understand the concepts that we were trying to teach. So, you know, so that when we think about the material, if we're talking about something like dialectics and dialectical behavior therapy, so for those of us who are very Zen in our approach, the idea that within everything, its opposite is also contained can be a very difficult concept to grasp. Now, for some people, it's a very easy concept to grasp, but if we sort of say, okay, here's an easy concept, and it's not an easy concept for you, well, it's just not an easy concept for you. So, you know, it can be presented in ways that is, you know, hard to understand. But the other thing is that how do any of us process information? I mean, many of the young people that come to us and many of their parents have learning difficulties. And so maybe the material is being taught in a very fast way, in a way that isn't easy to grasp. You know, sometimes we have people from other cultures who speak other languages. There's a lot of nuance in language. Or, you know, are we sure that they're understanding exactly what we're meaning? Now, the other thing to remember is whatever I teach you, I understand because I'm understanding it from my perspective. But, but what you get from it is in your mind. So I can think I've taught something very well, and I thought, great, I taught that well. But in your mind, it's like, that was really confusing. And I have to accept that for you, that was confusing, even if for me it wasn't confusing, because I always know what I want to say. That doesn't mean that you understand things in the way that I intended it to be. Okay. So maybe the material is being taught at a rapid pace. And you know, back in the day when we used to have a very short program, we would try to teach all the skills in about 4 weeks. Now we have a cycle where we just keep teaching over the years. And you know, people come in and out. And so if you are not somebody who learns quickly, then this is, and you know, teaching very quickly isn't going to work. Again, the use of specialized DBT jargon that was difficult to understand. You know, tomorrow I'm going to be teaching, I was telling Lynn and Mike and the team, I'm going to be teaching in Spain. I'm fluent in Spanish, and I teach in Spain as well. And, you know, so if I say, okay, I'm going to teach the interpersonal effectiveness skills of dear man, give and fast, in Spanish, those words mean nothing. And so what happens is we have to translate that into something that is meaningful to the receiving audience. So are we being, just because I know something so well in my head, is it too much jargon? And can you, as somebody receiving it, saying, wait a second, I don't actually understand what you were talking about. And then when you don't understand, not judging yourself for not having understood. Because it really is the onus of the teacher to be able to explain this. The other thing is that, you know, many of our kids love the acronyms, but for some people, acronyms are very confusing. Like, wait, what does this stand for? What does that stand for? And what was it intended? So DBT, for example, uses a lot of acronyms. It works very well for some people, but not for others. And again, this is where we don't want you to judge yourself. You might decide that you either can't use or won't use a skill because you don't remember the acronym, and then judge yourself for not having remembered it. But it's not about the acronym. If the acronym isn't helping you, then that's not a useful tool. And this is where asking for help is so important. Now, okay. One of the other things that happens in terms of barriers to skill use is overwhelming emotions, very powerful emotions, lead to a perceived loss of control over the behavior, then leads to negative thoughts about using skills, and then some self-judgment that they should be able to use skills. Okay, so I had told my family that I would make them a paella. First of all, my kids are terrified whenever my wife leaves because they feel like I'm starving them to death because everything I cook is terrible. So the thought of everything I cook is terrible, I'm going to make a paella now with all the ingredients. Aguirre is a Basque name, so my ancestry is Basque, and when we're in the Basque country, we love to have paella. So so I decided I'm going to make a paella. Okay, so I start making the paella. First of all, it's a disaster from the beginning because I've gotten the rice in the wrong place. I didn't get the saffron. I should have gotten I was trying to follow things. So now I'm getting really anxious because they already judged me about my terrible cooking. I'm noticing that I feel like I'm losing control of the behavior. I'm having a lot of negative thoughts about who I am and like what a terrible cook I am, and that I should be able to follow simple instructions. So then I just want to give up and say, okay, let's just call for pizza. Okay, now I am not good at cooking. So what I could do is I can ask for help. I can slow this process down. I can know that it's probably going to take me a little bit longer. I can do it in a step-by-step way. But that in the moment of strong emotionality, I wasn't able to do it. Now, when somebody's under tremendous distress, when your house is on fire, when your psychological house is on fire, the idea of just like saying, okay, take a deep breath, I want you to use opposite action, we're at sometimes too far into that emotionality to be able to talk someone down from that position. And so the idea is that most of us, when we're under tremendous distress, cannot use skills, whether it's me practicing for many years or a brand new parent. And that is, so the idea is to not get to such an emotionally overwhelmed state. Sometimes you can't help it. But if you can start noticing much earlier on, then you're much more likely to be able to use skills when your level of distress and the level of emotions isn't so high. Many people judge themselves saying, I was so angry, I was so upset with my kid, I was so overwhelmed, and I just wasn't able to use skills. Well, me neither. I would not be able to under those circumstances. And so the idea is that as you wake up in the morning, as you start noticing, is to begin to take care of yourself at that point and not when you're already struggling. So, the intense emotions, they overwhelm the person to such an extent that they feel a loss of control, and I want you to just think a little bit about this for yourselves, is how often have you felt, just out of control, out of the situation, because you're so overwhelmed by the emotions. And then, somebody comes and knocks on your door and says, hey, I hear you're overwhelmed. Have you tried the skills? And you say, what the heck are you talking about? You're trying to figure out how to survive that moment, and you don't think about the skills. And again, it goes back to this idea that that's not the time to practice the skills. Yes, it is the time to practice the skills, but I want you practicing the skills all along when you weren't in distress, so that when you get to distress, then it becomes much more automatic. Now, the other thing that gets in the way is negative thoughts about skills. So first of all, it's like, nah, just don't want to try it. The second is that, and this I often see in a lot of the young people, is like, what you're asking me to do is too difficult. It's pointless. I am absolutely certain that you're telling me to do something, it's just not going to work. The other thing is this. One of the sets of skill sets that we have is something called the distress tolerance skills. Distress tolerance skills are when you're in a difficult situation, is to practice skills to tolerate the distress of that moment. But here's the thing about it, is that once you stop practicing that skill, then the distress is going to come back. So then you have to use another distress tolerance skill. Well, let me just tell you, that's absolutely exhausting. So I don't actually like the distress tolerance skills so much. However, they're important to get you through the crisis in the moment. And so what we want you doing is to practice the skills that are going to give you long-term benefit, all the please skills, the sleeping, exercising, eating well, meditation, and all of those sorts of things on a daily basis. So you're strengthening your ability to be resilient. So then when you need to use the distress tolerance skills, they're not as effortful. But when you're using one distress tolerance skill, when you're just tolerating a very difficult moment, time after time after time, it can be exhausting, absolutely exhausting. Sometimes, and I have this especially with the young people, is they say, I'm just not going to use skills. I'm going to be defiant. I'm going to be rebellious. I know that it would probably help, but I'm just not going to do it. The other thing, and I get this quite a bit, is like, let's just say I am angry at my partner. And somebody says, okay, well, why don't you practice opposite action to anger? Why don't you try forgiving them? Why don't you try and love them? That they'll say, wait a second, if I do that, I'm not going to be as angry. And so that would invalidate the fact that I'm angry at this person. But the part about this is that, when you're angry, that's a toxicity inside of you. It does damage to you. So that when you can notice that you've been angry, validate that you've been angry, that something has upset you, then you use a skill to lower the level of anger, that benefits you. Yes, it might also benefit the other person, but it definitely benefits you, that you're using these skills primarily for you, secondarily for all the other people in your life. Others have feel that the thought of using skills provoked anxiety, forcing the person to confront rather than avoid the situation. So for example, let's say that I'm depressed and all I want to do is stay in bed and not go and face the world and the people in it. Now, if I say, okay, well, I want you to use skills, I want you to get out of bed, I want you to use opposite action to staying in bed by getting up out of bed, that then they say, well, what you're telling me is I have the skill of staying in bed and not facing the world. That is a solution, but the problem is it doesn't solve the problem. So what you're saying to me is instead I have to go and face the world. Yes. Now, by me telling the person to use the skills, it forces that confrontation, which is actually the thing that they need to do rather than avoid situations. Now, some people say, but wait a second, the situations that they have to confront are so big and so upsetting that it's just going to put them further into the hole. And one of the things I think a little bit about is the idea of dosing skills. You know, if you've got a headache and you take 200 milligrams of ibuprofen, maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't. If it doesn't, maybe 400 helps, maybe 600. So when I'm asking people to face the situation that provokes anxiety, I don't want to put them in a situation that is the most anxiety provoking. If they've just learned how to swim, I'm not going to throw them into an ocean. They have to start at the baby pool and then get bigger. So is the dose, is the thing that they have to face of such magnitude that no one could, or is it that they just have to go out and meet with one person? So you want to make sure that that's that you're not invalidating it by saying, this is what you need to do. So remember, part of the reason to use the skills is that you want to get better at parenting. You want to get better overcoming borderline personality disorder. You want to get better not feeling depressed. You want to feel more effective. That is a commitment that you are making to yourself. And you know that if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, nothing is ever going to change. Now, here's the thing that happens. Sometimes I tell people to do skills and they feel even worse. Okay, but what I appreciate in that moment is that they've actually tried something that was difficult and something that was new. I'm not guaranteeing that doing skills is going to make your life necessarily better. I'm just saying that if you do what you've always done, your level of suffering or struggle is going to stay the same. But in most cases, when people do things differently, the outcome is different. And in many cases, the outcome is for the better. Sometimes what we see on our unit is that 2 weeks after coming into our program, people get worse. And we used to get really worried about it. But the reason was that they were doing things differently that were difficult and exhausting. And B, they were paying attention to their emotions, which were often very painful. And until they were able to experience that in a very authentic and genuine way, they weren't, it didn't come down. So once they started to pay attention to that, their level of distress started to come down. So it's a gradual journey. One of the things that we sometimes get is like people saying, I've been suffering for the last 20 years. I need something right now that is going to help me deal with the situation. I don't have a tool for that because it's gradual. If you say, I am going to Japan tomorrow, I need to learn Japanese right now, there's nothing that we can do. If you say, I'm going to Japan in a year, then I can say, okay, I've got something that we can do. So we can start teaching you Japanese every single week. So what I'm saying is you've got to be kind to yourself as well. And you have to say, I am committed to make the change. I'm going to stay at it, but there's nothing that we can do like, okay, tomorrow everything's going to change. If you're in a group like in Family Connections or any other parenting skills group, to continue to attend the group, even if at first you don't understand. It's like learning a language, learning a musical instrument. Maybe you don't understand at first what was being taught. Even if you don't believe the skills will help, But often if you listen to the other participants in the group, they were often in the position that you were in to start with, where you didn't understand what they were talking about. You didn't think that these things would help. You didn't even know how they would help. But they ended up helping for the family members. And to trust that process. The ongoing practice of skills in your daily life. And again, it's like doing the thing that you need to over and over and over again. The brain learns by repetition. Everything that you're good at, you've learned because you've repeated. Now, here's the sad thing. If you repeat negative skills or maladaptive skills, you get good at doing those things. If you repeat negative self-talk, you get good at negative self-talk, meaning that that's the thing you do because you're practicing. You don't think of it as practice, but you're repeating over and over and over again. So we want you practicing these skills even when you don't need it. If you're going to commit to walking half an hour every day, stick to it every single day. When you're tempted to give up a recommitment to maintaining efforts, reminding yourself how much you've suffered and how much you wanted things to be different. The other thing is this, and we find this with a lot of our kids, is that when you first start this journey, and I want you each to think deeply into yourselves and just say, how alone have you felt? And for many people, who start this journey, they have felt like this is too hard to explain. No one will understand. But you know what? There's more than 500 of you. And I bet you everybody felt alone at one point. You're actually not that alone. Now, you're alone when you don't know where to turn to. But this is where asking others for help is so important. The other thing is that you want to make skills your own. And I talked about this a little bit earlier. One of the things that I like to do is I love to take ice cold showers. And when I was in Iceland, I was actually swimming in the glacial lakes. My kids thought I was absolutely, not altogether there. But, for me, it was a way of calming my body, etc. Now, I'm not hardly saying, okay, everybody, what you have to do now is go and jump in an ice cold lake. Of course not. You have to say, these skills work for me. This is how I use them. And this is how I interpret them. And this is what works for me. I can't tell you what the meaning is for you. And the thing about it is when you own it, then that it makes it all the more powerful. The other thing is that not all skills are equally applicable. That sometimes people say, I've practiced that. It just does not work for me. And 100%, not everything works for everyone. If you think about exercise, you say, okay, everybody go for a run. You say, well, running doesn't work for me. Okay, well, what about swimming? Swimming doesn't work for me. Cycling doesn't work for me. Gardening, yeah, gardening works for me. So what is the thing that works for you? So just because running works for me doesn't mean it works for you. And so sometimes what will happen is therapists and other people will insist that you have to use something that they tell them to do. And it's like, okay, but that actually isn't working for me. So what works for me? And the other thing is to, in terms of targeting the thoughts and behaviors that are impacting you personally, if you were all to sit down and write down, what are the thoughts that I have that negatively affect me? What are the behaviors that I do that negatively affect me? So let us say, for example, let's say that you wake up cranky every single morning. And one of the things that you like to do is that you like to take your cell phone with you to bed. And you stay up late at night and eventually you fall asleep at 3 o'clock in the morning and you have to get up at 7. So you've actually only had 4 hours of sleep and now you're irritable. You have to pay attention to that. That behavior is impacting you adversely and negatively. So, now you have to practice. Okay, I know this to be. I have to make a commitment to put this away. I'm going to put my phone in another room. I'm going to turn it off. What are the thoughts? If I have a thought that I'm a terrible person all the time, that I'm not a good parent all the time, that thought is not a helpful thought. Because what you want to do is you want to do something different. So you have to be honest with yourself and say, that is the thought that I'm having. How does it help me? Now, if you say, I'm not a very effective parent, that's going to motivate me to get some change, fine. But what I'm saying is often the thoughts that I'm talking about are the ones where people beat themselves up. You know, again, we want skills to become automatic. You know, when you drive a car, that's automatic. You don't think, oh, I've never been in a car before. This is the steering wheel. This is the indicator. This is the windshield wiper. This is the accelerator, the brake. It becomes automatic. You don't even think about it. We want DBT skills and the skills of dealing with difficult emotions and difficult relationships to become automatic. There it just comes. You know, and so it's, you know, you can say it's very difficult when you're in a struggle with someone you love, but it is much more difficult if you don't have the skills. That doesn't mean to say it's going to be easy once you have the skills. It just makes it easier. It makes it easier because you're more skillful in the relationship, and if you've had conflict, it's easier on you because you're able to regulate a lot more quickly. Okay. Now, the other thing is this, and this is one of the things that I just love about Sashbear. When I went up for the walk, first of all, we were welcomed with open arms. Secondly, you know, there was the sea of orange. You know, walking up and down, you know, doing the walk, people supporting each other, people encouraging each other. When I said earlier on that there was no one alone, no one was alone there. You know, and even if you felt somewhat alone, there was always somebody that you could talk to. And, you know, I saw people smiling and it was just wonderful. So it's important to be able to learn from each other and encourage. And, you know, certainly the more experienced people in groups can be, you know, part of like, hey, listen, we've been there before. And, you know, especially when you have doubts. I mean, if you were to talk to Lynn and Mike and a lot of the other senior people in Family Connections, they've had doubts. Listen, I still get doubts. But what I'm saying is that when you have those doubts, that you have someone to turn to. There's a, you know, it's a little bit like also this idea of connectedness. When, you know, when you guys go and watch your beloved Toronto Maple Leafs, which are just a little bit worse than the Boston Bruins. Okay, wait, why am I losing participants now? Okay, I mean, I'm just making an example, but you know, you're all there. There's that common connectedness. And you know, when there's that common connectedness, there's camaraderie, there's a shared goal, there's shared hope. And so it's the same sort of thing, like, you know, with when you have your support your team, that when you know other people have gone through this, that they themselves have struggled with suicidal thinking, that their loved ones have struggled with this, that others have had struggled with interpersonal conflict. You know, you know, it can feel good to just know that there are other people going through this with you. Make it fun. It's certainly easier to learn when there are fun activities along the way. And you know, I will sometimes, you know, many of our mindfulness exercises are, you know, breathing meditations. But you know, sometimes I will mix it up and I will get everybody dancing. You know, I think that the reason that's fun is because they didn't think I could dance and I can't, and so I look kind of ridiculous. But it's okay. You know, it's like you can pay attention. Like you can make things fun. You know, life is too serious to be taken seriously. You know, so it's like you've got to have some fun along the way. And I think one of the other things that happens with the Sashbear walk is just how much fun people have. You know, there's the walk, and then there's music, and there's people getting, you know, together. The other thing is this, and that is, it's so easy to be punitive and to be critical and judgmental of people who don't know better. And, you know, no one knows until they know. And, you know, if something's easy for you, if you're a mathematician, if you're a cook, if you're a crochet expert, if you're a musical expert, you know, you're good at that. But like, I'm not good at any of those things. I mean, you know, but it's easy to sort of say, okay, you know, like you're not good at this. So, you know, like that's a stupid question, or just things like that. Don't punish people. Like they need your help. And remember that there was a time when you didn't know. You know, if you have an individual therapist, we often recommend that your individual therapist be somebody that also has a skills knowledge so that they can reinforce the acquisition and application of skills. Sometimes people have therapists that don't use skills, and then it's difficult to know what they think about the skills. And so, we typically don't recommend a therapist that isn't somebody who is reinforcing skills. Certainly friends and family, be curious about the skills and explaining and discussing skills. One of the things that we find really wonderful is when the kids who come to our unit take their binders home, and then they, I had a father who emailed me recently and they said, well, we have Skills Friday. And so what happens is our kid will teach us the skills every Friday night for an hour. And then I've had other kids who've gone to college who take their DBT binders with the skills and teach family members or friends or fellow students these skills. Now, what's interesting about this, especially for the kids, is that I have had so many kids who've come through our program who are now becoming psychologists or social workers. And when I say, well, tell me about that, it says, when I took psych classes, they were so easy. I totally understood what was going on there because they had repeated a lot of the DBT skills. So that was pretty encouraging. All right, so this was, by the way, the research. I just put a link here to one paper on barriers to overcoming skills. But the new ways of behaving are the best path to a more effective life. Old ways of behaving are just going to keep you stuck in that rut. Maybe it's familiar, and maybe you say, well, that's the suffering I know. But what I'm saying is if you want things to be different, you have to behave differently. But you may have to make a deep, deep commitment to yourself to saying, I don't like the way that my life is being lived. And so, I'm going to do things differently. Again, I can't guarantee that the outcome is going to be positive or negative. In most cases, it is positive. But if it turns out that something isn't working for you, then just do something else, So this is Dr. Gillian Galen and myself both at 3 East. If the material that, seems too complicated, that we have turned it into a book that, it says for dummies, but, we are, and by dummies, it's a very compassionate way of saying, look, let's make this as simple yet sophisticated as we can so that people can learn. So with that, I'll stop my share and then I'll invite my colleagues back on. And I'm sure, Doreen, that we have lots of questions that we can take.
Thank you, Blaise. Yes, we do. And first of all, I want to say thank you. I recognize so much of myself. There was that point early on where you talked specifically about, how we practice all the negative things. We get really good at doing all the negative stuff. As someone who has lived with depression, it's like, okay, I recognize that. I practiced that negative self-talk and negative self-judgment and that idea of the distress tolerance and using the distress tolerance skills to get to a point where you can actually build resilience, right? That they're short term and you need to build something long term. And for me, that took a good long time. It took like 3 years to get from major depression to a point where all those things were in place and I can live a life that I'm happy with. So I just really struck me how important that concept is. We have lots and lots of questions. A lot of them are about really specific situations. So I've tried to let people know that we're not going to really talk about specific situations or, anything that's about trying to help in a specific case. But there are some commonalities. One of the things that we often hear in the family connections groups is that our loved one is really uncommunicative. And so we are learning the skills in family connections. And it's like, well, how can I practice it? When my loved one just like puts up the wall, the defenses go up, they won't talk to me, and my kid, I text with my kid, right? Like that's basically all the communication I have. So
Yeah, this is, we see this very, very commonly, and, the irony what this is, again, I just wanted to say something that you said, Doreen, I want to be very careful that I'm not giving very specific clinical advice to any person. So when I speak in general, you might say, wait a second, that's not the thing that is relevant to me. So I'm just speaking in general because we see this quite a lot. And one of the other ironies to that situation is that the parents say, what I don't understand is, like, they will not speak to me, but they speak to all their friends all the time. Like, so that they talk to their friends, but they don't talk to me. So now so a few things. If you think about why you speak to someone, it generally is because either you need something from them or you want to speak to them. Now, what's happened is, if there has been a pattern where a person has felt judged, where a person has felt criticized for being who they are, the thought that comes into their mind is, if I go and speak to this person, they're going to judge me and they're going to criticize me. So I would just rather not have that experience. So one of the things that I often tell our parents, and one of the things that gets kids talking to their parents as a general rule, once they see the parents changing their behavior, becoming more validating, listening more, not judging and not criticizing, the child, it's almost like, the shell opens and they're able to say, my parents are doing something different. They're not judging, they're not criticizing. And little by little, they start to open up a little bit more. But if a person feels misunderstood, it's like, oh, like, I'm so sad. Well, the reason you're so sad is because you don't exercise and you should get out of bed right now and everything. Like, they feel shut down again. But if you say, okay, you know what? I keep telling you to do that and you don't talk to me. Something isn't working. Let me listen to what you have to say. So I think that that's an important piece.
A lot of people talk about, it's kind of the same and kind of the flip side, which is that they're afraid to say anything, that walking on eggshells feeling. So then, maybe instead of the stone wall, they get that outburst of anger.
Yeah, this is, again, very, very common experience, and thank you for asking that question. It's almost like you can't say anything right. Anything that you say causes a reaction. Okay, now, this is where it gets very, very complicated. I want to try to break this down into a few elements. If I say to you, Doreen, can you give me a slice of pizza? And you don't pay attention to me, for example. So I say, Doreen, can I get a slice of pizza? You don't pay attention. Or you go and get me some ice cream. And eventually I start yelling at you, and then you bring me the slice of pizza. What I have learned is that a very strong reaction gets what I want. Now, the problem with that is that for you might say, gee, what just happened? I can't be around Blaise because if I'm around Blaise, he has this very, very big reaction. I have learned that I need to have a big reaction to get what I want from you. And you have learned not to confront me or not to say anything about that because you don't want that big reaction, because the big reaction was terrifying. So often, we see patterns of behavior that have to do, it's not that walking on eggshells started, like tomorrow, and then it's often taken years to develop this walking on eggshells behavior. So the thing about it is this is where we say, look, child, you, loved one, you want something, and you're not getting a need met. And so what happens is that you feel that you need to bring your emotions to a high level. The problem is for the other person is that they then get terrified and they do one of two things. They withdraw or they give in. And sometimes neither of those are helpful, because the other problem is if you want other people in your life and you treat them that way, not going to work. And then you're going to feel alone and isolated. So what I want to do is I want to slow this down and I want to listen to what you have to say. I might still say no to what you're asking for, but let me listen differently. And what I want you to do, so I'm going to develop the skill of listening deeply, and what's going to be helpful to me, I'm going to do this, is if you can work on the skill of lowering your reactivity as I try. So that I'm working on the skill of listening, you're working on the skill of emotion regulation. That this is a transaction between the two of us. We both bring something to that transaction. Now, as a parent, you might say, I didn't do anything wrong. But for the child, their thing that what you did wrong was not listening. So it's or not getting their way. So it's recognizing that you're bringing something to the table, but you're also asking for something. If we both do this, you'll get more of what you want. I'll listen more. Our relationship will get better. And then we can, move forward. So this is the benefit to both of us if we both do this. If we don't, you'll continue to react. I'll continue to be afraid, and we will not get close. So, yeah.
So it takes a lot of patience and a lot of communication.
Patience, communication, and practice. And this is where the family connections can come in, is to say, guys, I'm really struggling. Okay, let's try over and over and over again. And do some role plays. Here's the other thing, is that we get so scared of any kind of big reaction. It's okay. Look, a big reaction never really, it's unpleasant, but it's not such a big deal. So do some role plays, like, Lynn, why didn't you say, okay, hey, Blaise, all right, listen, let's listen, So do some role plays because if everybody's all nice, well, then you're walking on eggshells. No. Well, okay, now I'm being too nice. Well, now it's like, then I'm walking. If you're going to practice walking, behavior for walking on eggshells, you want to create in a safe way the condition of walking on eggshells, so that you can practice being in it. Role plays, lots of role plays.
I think it's interesting that all the questions, and of course I feel the same way too. It's about like, how do I help my loved one? And
Okay.
we carry so much of that within us. And I know Kathleen has said she has a couple questions about shame and guilt. And I think that's a big piece for us as family members.
Let me just say one thing, because this is so important. People often ask me this question: how do I help my loved one? I truly do not know how you can help your loved one until you have helped yourself first. If I don't have the skill set to be able to manage my fears, my emotions, my difficulties, if you come to me, Doreen, and you say, I want to learn how to swim. And I say, okay, and I throw you in the pool, and you start struggling. And you say, well, aren't you going to teach me? You say, well, I don't know how to swim. I said, well, wait a second. So the thing is that if I don't have the skill set for myself, I cannot help you until I have the skill. So you cannot help someone until you have the skill set to help yourself first. It's the whole thing with the air mask with the plane. It's like you put it yourself first before you put it onto that other person. So, if you were able to manage the situation, you wouldn't need help. But you aren't able to manage the situation, so you need help. Learn those skills. Once you do that, you have a fighting chance of being able to help your kid. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll consider ourselves told. Okay, Kathleen, would you like to ask maybe those questions around shame and guilt? And
Sure.
then I think we'll probably have to close.
Okay, so the question is, shame and guilt, are they the same? And if you feel one, do you automatically feel the other? And if it's no to all of that, then what's the difference?
First of all, thank you so much for that question. And let me just tell you that the question of guilt, so the way that we consider guilt is where is the feeling that shows up when you've crossed your own values. So if I yell at you and I insult you, and it's not my value to insult people, but I've insulted you, then I feel guilty that I've done something wrong. I've crossed my value. And so then what I do is I need to, apologize. Now, sometimes people apologize for nothing that they've done wrong. So we call that unjustified guilt. The problem with shame, you know what, and BTech, behavioral tech, is the group that does that sort of like kind of continues to modify dialectical behavior therapy, is that it's not that clearly defined, because often it has to do with my own, with sort of either a societal rejection or a rejection of my own self, based on that I've done something wrong at a much bigger societal level, and I've brought kind of an embarrassment on myself that I can't live with, and so it's a little bit more diffuse, and so that a lot of people feel shame without necessarily guilt, because there's not something like I did that thing wrong. It's sort of, it has a sense of like, I am a bad person and I feel shame for being a bad person. And so the problem is that like sometimes some of the things that they've done maybe haven't been all that good, but at other times it's just a thought that they're having in their head. And when that's happening, they experience shame. So it's actually a little bit more difficult to target shame. And I don't think it's been, in a lot of the manuals, it's being very clearly defined. So I think that we need to do a lot more work with shame to become much more precise and to target it more effectively. And people often confuse those two things, but they don't need to co-occur, no.
Okay, thank you for that. That was a great explanation, because it is very confusing. And we hear a lot about shame and guilt in our groups as well, as a primary emotion actually for our loved ones. So that's
yeah, and I think that for guilt, we can break it down, and again, let me just say something else, and that is, we like to think about these things in very black and white ways, but sometimes, like maybe 10%, like maybe I didn't mean to, sort of insult you, but then a little bit of me kind of liked it, so maybe it's like, 90% justified and 10% unjustified, or vice versa. So, but we teach it in these discrete ways, very black and white ways. But then you've got to, once you are practicing mindfulness, saying, you know what, what I did was wrong. Now you're able to say, because, but shame itself is a difficult emotion to sort of fully capture, and then we provide solutions that aren't actually necessarily all that helpful. So hopefully we will have another discussion in the future where we're able to think about shame a lot more.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Doreen, do we have time for one more, or are we done?
If you've got another one that follows nicely, and then I think we'll stop.
Follows nicely. No, they're more technical, clinical questions that I have. So no, that's it for today. So thank you, Blaise, for answering that question so well.
Yeah. Let me just say, when we train psychologists in the skills associated with dialectical behavior therapy, the training for psychologists is 5 days, 8 hours a day. So all we wanted to say, when we talk about skills here, what we're talking about is abilities that you might not previously have had. So if you think about, how do I regulate myself in the context of a stressful situation, and you didn't have that skill before, that ability before, then it becomes a skill for you. So when we're talking about these skills, we're talking about the emotion regulation skills, and there's a bunch of them. We're talking about distress tolerance skills, and there's a bunch of them. We're talking about mindfulness skills, and there's a bunch of them. We're talking about interpersonal effectiveness skills, and there's a bunch of them. So we speak about this in very broad terms, and then of course a group like Family Connections and other groups that teach these skills will get into the weeds of it. So it's not like you're saying, well, tell me what skill to use right now with my child. I mean, again, it's like, when you learn a language, it's not just one thing. You're going to learn the whole system. So, All
Thank
right.
you so much, Blaise. I'm gonna hold up the book and give a plug for it here.
Oh, great. Lynn.
So you have to come to Ontario and sign them
There
all
you go.
for us, because that's where we all are with them. Just to let people know, because a couple of questions have come up, it is available from Amazon, but I expect it's also available lots of other places. And as you all can tell, Dr. Aguirre is absolutely wonderful at sort of simplifying and making this really intelligible to those of us who struggle with some of these really technical concepts. So I think Lynn probably wants to close off and say thank you to you.
Thank you, Doreen and Blaise. Thank you so much. I think like what you share with us today, it's so nice, like just to help us like understand how we can use those skills without feeling that nothing really works. So I really appreciate this. And yes, we hope to see you soon in person or for another webinar. We value all the work you do, and that DBT for Dummies, I think it's very popular. No wonder why it was #1 on Amazon. And we really want to say thank you so much. And as we always close the meeting with Sashbear, we want to give you a big Sashbear hug.
Thank you.